Welcome to part 2, verbal communication. The next part of verbal communication that we need to talk about is the fact that although we have the best intentions with the words that come out of our mouths, we can sometimes be misunderstood. So the different ways in which we have misunderstandings with verbal communication, the first one is called bypassing. And that is the idea that people are confused by the fact that the same word can mean different things to different people. So the way in which we avoid this misunderstanding is to be aware of meaning. Be aware of the fact that something could mean something to one person and mean something completely different to somebody else. We talk about being other-oriented a lot. This is the perfect example of the fact that we become other-oriented. We think about what this could have meant for somebody else. Think about words that are used that could have a stronger meaning for some people, but not as strong as a meaning for somebody else. The second one is malapropism, and that is the idea that we can be unclear in the words that we have, and that can be confusing to people. It could mean that confusion of one word or phrase for another that sounds familiar to it. The book does a good example of words that can sometimes be intertwined or interchanged and have different meaning. So they use the 4 examples of construction and instruction, or subscription and prescription. Sometimes it can be funny when these things are interchanged, but it can also be confusing, right? So I have a funny example of this. I think I might have shared this with you when we were talking about my public speaking classes that I had in college, but I interchanged the words specific and Pacific a lot until my senior year of college, when a professor pointed out that every time I meant to say specifically, I said pacifically. So that's a really good example of a malapropism where I meant specifically, but the words that came out of my mouth were pacifically. So just a fun example there. The next one is avoid the idea of trying to use indexing or this idea of allness, which is this idea that you are very kind of general with something. The book does a good kind of question answer where it says, you know, where is the item that they need? Like, where is the stapler? And somebody says, it's in the cabinet. And then the other person says, okay, what cabinet? And then you say, it's in the cabinet in the office. Okay, well, the office has 6 cabinets. Can you be a little more specific? Yeah, it's the one by the desk. Okay, well, there's 6 drawers by the desk. It's the first one from the top. And then the last person says, why didn't you just tell me that in the beginning? So this idea of allness is that you give a generic answer. Where did I leave my shoes? Outside, right? That's very kind of not specific. Where did I leave my shoes? Oh, I saw them next to the chair in the back corner of the yard. That is very specific, right? Not Pacific, specific. The next one is be aware that there's this idea called static evaluation. It's this idea that we have the responsibility as communicators to know that words can change, right? The meanings of things can change. And we want to be aware that it's kind of a fluid thing. Like, there is times in which something can mean one word at one point in time, and then it can change meaning, or it can change the harshness of the word we use, or the specific of the word we use. So you want to make sure that you're aware of the ever-changing meanings behind different words. The next one is either or polarization techniques that people use with their words. One of the best examples I can give you of an either or polarization is several years ago, after 9/11 had happened, there was a kind of patriotic movement in America where people were kind of forced into picking a side, whether you were for the war in Afghanistan or you were not. And the message came from the top. The president at the time had a press conference on the deck of a aircraft carrier, where he said, you are either for us or with us, or you're against us. You're either with us or against us. That verbal communication forces people into picking sides. It forces a polarization. Now, we are experiencing, not just in this current climate with COVID-19, but we in the last probably 5 years are experiencing more and more and more polarization with the messages that come out of our government. And it hasn't been recent. I would even say it's been the last decade, the last 10 years, words are being used for polarization. And we know that that's not necessarily the case, right? Another good example that the book, I think, uses is the idea of you're either for prayer in school or you're an atheist. And then the example in the book goes on to say, you can actually be against prayer in school and not be an atheist, right? So this either or polarization says that that is not the truth. There is no pick one or pick the other, because there can certainly be a gray area that your words cannot force people into kind of separating them into categories. The last misunderstanding is being unbiased. And that is, of course, the idea. Remember, we talked about when you are biased, you are kind of pulling your own unique set of attitudes, values, and beliefs ahead of your own. You think that you are superior in your culture, in your language, in your lived experience, and then you're biased towards people that are not. So the idea is that we are not that way to people, right? You know that there are people that in our lives that have different sexual orientations than us, different cultures than us, different race and ethnicities, different age groups, different generations they come from. And we have the responsibility as human beings, but also as people that communicate, that we do not say things that are, with our words, that are disrespectful in any way towards people that come from different backgrounds, different genders, different sexual orientations, different social classes, different even occupations, or look differently than the way we do. When you say things that are biased, when you say things that are considered kind of discriminatory language, we call that hate speech. That is the term that we use to kind of pull out those different words that are kind of promoting hate in our society and not being kind of other oriented and not accepting other cultures and other people with different lived experiences as valuable in our lives. And we know from previous chapters that is the goal, right? Is that we are in interpersonal communication, have empathy, that we are other oriented, and that we are considering other people's differences is actually valuable in an interpersonal communication relationship and not invaluable, right? We want to encourage that, and we don't want to take away from that. So that's what it means to be unbiased. How we kind of misunderstand things and say things that might promote that in a way, a lot of times this stuff is innocent. A lot of times you look over and you say, oh, look, there's a policeman. And really the term today should be police officer, right? When you look and say, oh, look, there is a stewardess helping me with my food on a plane, it's actually a flight attendant, because we know that some of these terms are gender oriented, and we have people that are in occupations from both genders this day and age. And so you don't want to use language that kind of makes people kind of fall into a certain gender when that is not what describes them. So I have a recent example of this. I have a friend who was at the doctor recently, and she did use the term female doctor. She said, I sat down and the doctor came in. She was a woman. And then goes on to tell me the story. And I kind of laughed a little bit, and she asked like kind of why I giggled. And I said, I'm interested in why you described her as a female doctor. Wonder why that was important to you to say that. And this is my friend who's also a female. So I wanted to hear her perspective on that. And she said she didn't really know why. She just thought that was an important point to point out. And I was hoping her answer would be that she was proud of the fact that this specialist in this area was a female. But she really couldn't give me an answer, but she was using that as a description. When really she could have just said the doctor, and it wouldn't have mattered in the story if it was male or female, because we know that either gender is absolutely capable of being a doctor, right? So if we were face-to-face in class, I would have you come up with other terms that are used in our society that can sometimes be considered biased because of what we're saying, like it was a female doctor, or instead of saying mankind, you say humankind, right? Instead of saying fireman, you say firefighter. So I would ask of you, as you're watching this, maybe think of some terms that are used in our society that do promote biasm, and see if you can think of anything additional than what is used here on this slide. Verbal communication, the goal of verbal communication is that we use our words to support each other, right? And I know that makes sense to all of us because we're all in an interpersonal communication class and learning so much this semester. But again, as a reiteration of what we've talked about throughout the semester, we use our words to describe things rather than evaluate, which that means is we use our words to describe things rather than judge people, right? Or judge situations. We use our words to solve problems, not create problems. We use our words to be genuine to people, not fake, right? Not give empty words, not give words that have no meaning, but words that are actually legitimate, genuine words. We use words to empathize. Remember, the goal of interpersonal communication and relationships is to be empathetic, not sympathetic, right? That deeper level of understanding and feeling. So we use words that confirm empathy. When you say something like, I feel sorry for you, that is sympathy. But when you repeat somebody's words and say things like, from what I'm hearing, it sounds like you are very upset about what that person said to you. You're even hurt in a way, right? When you use those words, when you say things like you're repeating back their feelings, that is empathy. That is empathizing with somebody. And by repeating back their words, you are, with your words, with verbal communication, you are showing them that you understand and that you're empathetic. You be flexible with your words. What that means is that you have the ability to learn new words, use them where appropriate, understand if you're using words inappropriately. Don't try to make excuses or judgments of other people. If you learn something new about a word, you're flexible enough to roll with it, to understand when you need to make some adjustments, and keep going with good, strong verbal communication. And then the final one is to present yourself as an equal, which means you do not promote biased behavior. You do not promote things that are not other-oriented. You, in verbal communication, present yourself as being equal to other people. You don't use your words to create this separation of a higher nature that you are. And also, I would say, to a level of critical thinking, in interpersonal communication, you quickly pick up on people that are trying to do that so that you understand that that's what they're doing rather than trying to manipulate you with their words. Keep in mind, in verbal communication, the what, who, how, why, and where are very important. What are you saying? How are you saying it? Who are you saying it to? Why are you saying something? And where are you saying it? What are you saying is the information, right? The details. How you say it is what words you put emphasis on. You put emphasis on certain words because you want to make sure that you're proving a point. Are you using that responsibly is the question there. Who are you saying things to? Because you might talk a little more informally to some people than you would other people, but you can't interchange them. If you're in an audience where you need to speak differently, then you have the responsibility to do that, right? The best example I always use in class is the way I speak to my 8-year-old nephew is much different than how I speak to my husband, right? Because we have a much different relationship. How I speak to my best friend I've known since I was in preschool is much different than somebody that I've just met and I'm just learning to get to know and kind of developing a new level of self-disclosure with, right? Totally different. Why are you saying those things? Like, what is the value in the words? Is it promoting good relationships, good verbal communication, good interpersonal relationships? And then where are you saying it is important because what you say is important, right? You wouldn't yell out some expletives at a funeral. You wouldn't speak softly and timidly if you were in a meeting that you were running, right? So where you are, the environment that you're in, the context in which you're communicating is absolutely essential to think about when you're thinking about verbal communication. So remember way back at the beginning of the semester, right? All communication happens within a context, a culture, an environment. that context and environment is going to dictate where you're saying things, right?